I anticipate is a move towards more low-intensity conflict, where it's a war of attrition, right? So it's a naval blockade. You have some ground forces deployment, and then you have some continual airstrikes. But the tempo of the war will be not as high as before. And the reason why is that I think that this will become a global economic war as we move on.
Professor Jiang, as you said, the idea is to keep the wars going, not to win them. They don't care that they were going to lose. They need to keep these wars going. But they're going to lose.
What is the exit strategy for the elites then? You know, because I'm sure they have exit strategies.
Watching Capital Cosm, my name is Danny. It is April 24th, 2026, and we've got a special treat for you guys today. We've got not one, but two big headline main eventers. We've got Professor Jiang and Alex Krainer at the same time. Gents, thank you both so much for making time from your hefty and busy schedules to chat today.
Thank you for the invite, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Great that you organized this.
Yeah, guys, if you haven't already, hit that like button. Let's get this video out to as many people as possible. It's sure to be a conversation to remember for the ages. Let's go ahead and start off with what's been ongoing in the Straits of Hormuz and in Iran. Obviously, that's the big story that everyone wants to talk about. It seems that we found ourselves in a supposed indefinite ceasefire from President Trump. Professor, we'll start off with you, get your take, kind of get your read on the situation. Where you think, what do you think the plan is here with this indefinite ceasefire? Is President Trump looking for an off ramp, or is he trying to use this as time to build up more troops and artillery?
Well, I mean, it seems as though they are trying to build up more forces for a quick strike against Iran. So even though there's a ceasefire, there's been a lot of cargo flights of American weaponry and munitions into the Middle East. And the George H.W. Bush has been making its way into theater, and it's expected to arrive in a couple of days. So I think like by next week, we should have a better indicator of what's going on. But I think from my perspective, what I anticipate is a move towards more low-intensity conflict, where it's a war of attrition, right? So it's a naval blockade. You have some ground forces deployment, and then you have some continual airstrikes. But the tempo of the war will be not as high as before. And the reason why is that I think that this will become a global economic war as we move on. So I'll hand it over to Alex.
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
It's a very, very difficult question, Danny, and I'm not entirely sure how to answer it in any concrete way. I've been observing this event and really scratching my head, because I was among the people who was fully convinced that Trump would never attack Iran, because I thought it was just extraordinarily dumb and unrealistic, that the downside risk was enormous, that the upside to the attack was next to nothing. Little to gain for Trump. I understand that there's a lot to gain for, let's say, for the Western Empire, which, I always characterize as the undead reincarnation of the British Empire. And so we can see that there are certain, there's a certain echelon of power, certain vested interests that very, very badly want this war. And this incentive will not go away. For Trump himself, politically, he desperately needs out. So I think that we have a bit of a conflict between two layers of the command and control structure, where you have the President of the United States and the, the legitimate government of the United States that got enmeshed in this. It risks becoming a quagmire for them, so they want out. And then there's a higher level that definitely wants this war. And the reason why they want this war, let's first say why Trump and U.S. government and the U.S. military, the Pentagon and so forth, the whole the whole organization doesn't want the war because they can't win it and because they risk losing very bigly. And it's going to cost Trump politically his presidency, his legacy, very likely loss of midterm elections. And so everything that he at least ostensibly tried to achieve gets derailed fatally, permanently. And so on the other side, why do they want to continue the war? Let's start with the fact that Iran is the 5th richest nation in the world in terms of natural resource wealth. And it's estimated at about 30 trillion US dollars. And then when we connect this with the fact that our monetary system is predicated on circulating money as debt, for which you need collateral, and that the monetary system is fraudulent. So if it doesn't grow like a Ponzi scheme, it mathematically collapses. It's a mathematical certainty. So in order for the whole thing to stay together, to not implode, they need to bring new collateral into the equation. And so this is why, we've had colonialism for the last 500, 600 years, and why this colonialism never ends. And they never give up on going after one resource-rich nation or region after the next. So you have Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Venezuela. It just never ends. The rhetoric is, the narratives are always, oh, the Iranian mullahs are terrible people. If they get a nuclear bomb, they're gonna incinerate us all. Similar to Iraq, Saddam Hussein is a terrible person, and if he gets weapons of mass destruction, it's going to be the end. Gaddafi is a madman. He's killing his own people. Bashar al-Assad is a madman. He's killing his own people. We can run the clock back however far you want. In 1971, Salvador Allende is a communist. If he stays, then, there's going to be domino effect, communism spreading. So we're always fighting demons around the world. We always find some evil that we need to stomp out. But it's just, kind of strangely correlated that we always seem to be attacking resource-rich regions. And so this is a constant which has given us colonialism, which has given us forever wars, and it never goes away. And they never give up. Like if we look at the history of Russia, you could go back to 1200s and find the Pope in Rome inciting German and Latvian nobles to conduct military campaigns into territories of today's Russia. And then it never really stopped, it continued, the Polish invasion, the Swedish invasion, the, Napoleon's invasion, Hitler's invasion, multiple attempts at regime change, which, once upon a time involved setting up a fake czar in the Kremlin. But it also involved the 1917 color revolution, the Bolshevik coup. It had also involved a sort of a color revolution in 1991. When they replaced the communist regime with Boris Yeltsin, who was, a different version of Volodymyr Zelensky, who basically worked 2 hours a day, drank the rest, and played tennis or hunted. And he had American advisors write decrees for him, which he would just sign. And they had practically total control of Russia. And in those 10 years that they did, they brought Russia to a state of almost total disintegration. And the average salary of a Russian worker was $56 a month. So we can probably safely foresee that this dynamic is not going away. Trump might go away, but it would be the umpteenth time that the American people vote. They always vote for anti-war presidents, for anti-war candidates, people who promise them no more foreign wars, we're going to change everything, hope and change, blah, blah. But they always get more war. It doesn't matter who they vote for. Trump was going to be a radical change in policy course. But here we are, again, same rhetoric, same policies. You remember, sorry, I'm making it long, but I'll wrap up quickly. Remember, it was only in December, sounds like forever ago, but it was only in December that the United States, the Trump administration published the national security strategy for the United States. And what was it? It was like, enough of this nation building, global wars, we're withdrawing into our own hemisphere. And now we're at war with Iran. Not only, the United States is also at war in Sudan and Somalia. This has been, beyond the smokescreen of Iran war. But this year, United States has bombed Somalia 58 times. Nobody's talking about it, but this is real. So it seems that between the Trump administration and whatever higher echelon is actually dictating foreign policy, there's a conflict. But it seems to me that ultimately this higher echelon gets to press the clutch of the whole policy machine and put it in motion. Anyway, so that's how I see it, and this is why I believe that this problem's not going away and this war is not going away. I would agree with Professor Jiang that probably the intensity is going to drop off and it's going to maybe go back to sabotage attempts at regime change and economic pressure. But I think that the dynamic has changed, and now that Iran is actually in control of that conflict rather than the empire. Danny, either you froze or your connection
Professor
froze.
Jiang, if you're national. Oh, what about now?
Yeah,
that's fine.
Are we back?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much for laying all that out, Alex. Professor Jiang, if you don't mind commenting on the national security strategy document that came out in December that Alex just alluded to, because you've done some research into that document and kind of make sense of what we're seeing today versus what was outlined in that document. Is there a disconnect, or are things going according to what the document outlined? I mean, what's your view?
Right. So, having read the document, I think it is erroneous to say that America's intention is to retreat back into the Western Hemisphere. I think what the document really says is that America will no longer adopt a liberal interventionist attitude towards geopolitics. No more multilateral cooperation, no more working United Nations, no more being policemen of the world. I think the intention is to move towards a more mercantilist, realpolitik, interest-driven attitude towards geopolitics. So whatever puts American interests first. And I think that what this means is how this war will play out in Iran is that using Iran as a pretext in order to basically impose a naval blockade on the entire world. And so I'll give you two data points. Okay, the first data point is that the UAE has asked America for a line of credit. Now, I believe the UAE Sovereign Wealth Fund, and Alex will know better than I do, but I think that the Sovereign Wealth Fund has $1.4 trillion, so that they don't need a line of credit. And the only reason why they would ask for a line of credit is to entangle the United States into the GCC, right? So think of the Lend-Lease policy that America had for Britain back in World War I and World War II. And eventually the Lend-Lease became so exorbitant that America had to come into the war to save Britain from military defeat against Germany. And the same situation happened in the GCC, where UAE first asked for some credit, but then Saudi Arabia comes in, and eventually America has to lend trillions of dollars to the GCC in order to finance this war, right? But that's good for America because, as Alex points out, what they want are collaterals. And so as collateral, they could have the entire GCC oil resources, and that's a trade that Saudi Arabia and UAE would make in order to maintain their control over the GCC. Okay, so that's point one, and I hope that Alex can respond to this point. I think that the UAE asking for a line of credit is a huge deal. It's not really discussed much in the press. That's point one. Point two is, if you look at what America is doing in terms of foreign policy, what they're trying to do is establish a firm control over maritime choke points around the world. So, the Indonesian defense minister recently visited Washington, D.C., and they signed a treaty giving America access to Indonesian airspace. And an Indonesian minister has said that maybe now that Iran is collecting tolls on the Strait of Hormuz, Indonesia should collect tolls on the Strait of Malacca. Now, from the Chinese perspective, this is huge because 80% of China's energy imports go through the Strait of Malacca, and 90% of all imports and trade go through for China through the Strait of Malacca. Okay, but that's just the Strait of Malacca. Remember, there's also the Strait of Gibraltar, and the United States and Morocco are now negotiating a treaty there. There is the Panama Canal, and America is exerting more control over that. So we can expect what's going to happen in the next few months is that America is going to have a firm lock on these maritime choke points. Right now, the American Navy is committing piracy over the oceans. So originally, Trump said that they want to impose a naval blockade on the Iranians. But you can't do that because then you'll be too close to Iranian missiles and drones. So they're now sitting off the Indian Ocean, and they're now. I think they've already seized 2 Iranian vessels. I think Alex will know more about this than I do. And then Lindsey Graham came out and says, you know what, we should do this for the entire world. Our ships should be everywhere to capture these Russian shuttle fleet tankers, these Iranian ships, these Chinese ships that are evading sanctions for the good of the world. So I will just point these two things out in that, it seems as though it's all very chaotic, but if you zoom out, and this is what Alex said, it's in the best interest of transnational capital to have this to have these maritime blockades going around, and they're hoping to basically indebt the rest of the world to U.S. treasuries in order to finance this war. So I'd be interested in Alex's response.
Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
I don't disagree with anything that you said. I would just add a little bit more color in, I think that the U.S. treasuries is a relatively smaller part of the game of the game, because of course, if you trade in U.S. dollars, then you end up parking a lot of your money in U.S. Federal Reserve, and they get recycled into U.S. treasuries. So whether you like it or not, you're financing the American state, and that's part of how the United States is. The whole government is incentivized to keep everybody locked into this U.S. dollar system as the reserve currency and the trade settlement currency. I think that the ultimate beneficiaries, however, are a level above, and that here the incentive is much more significant because let's just see what happens if you manage to regime change Iran. You install a Volodymyr Zelensky in Tehran, Shah Reza Pahlavi, who will do whatever his Western sponsors demand of him. Let's say Iran has a nuclear program, and they want to build nuclear power plants. They have a choice. They can have Chinese corporations build the nuclear power plants, or they can have Russian corporations build them, or they can have American corporations build them. Right now, let's say that if you have a Chinese corporation build your nuclear power plant, your electricity is going to cost about 20 cents on the dollar compared to what Westinghouse would build you. But guess what? And so, if you have an independent sovereign government in Tehran, they're going to say, well, Chinese nuclear power plants are much better. They're more modern, they're more efficient, and they cost way cheaper. So, obviously, But if you get Shah Reza Pahlavi, it doesn't matter. He's going to give the contracts to Westinghouse. And so what? It's going to cost a couple of $1 billion to build those plants. And who's going to finance that? Well, it's going to be JP Morgan, Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, banks like that. What happens then? Westinghouse is going to have to pay back those loans, right? So by that decision, let's say JP Morgan's balance sheet immediately increases by a couple of $1 billion, whatever that plant costs. And once the electricity is delivered to the Iranian people and businesses, they have to pay for the electricity, whatever the price, right? And then that money is going to be paying back the loans to Goldman Sachs. So that loan, let's call it $1 billion, right? It's more, but let's call it $1 billion. That loan immediately becomes an asset on JP Morgan's balance sheet. And it's a profit-making asset because over the life of this loan, Westinghouse is probably going to have to pay back double what they received as a loan. And so JP Morgan, just like that, gets $1 billion of free money because Trump, NATO, the British, whoever, the Israelis, changed the government in Tehran. And then you can multiply this many, many, many times over because it's going to involve oil, gas, ports, airports, infrastructure, bridges, the media in Iran. It's going to involve everything. They're going, pharmaceutical companies, no more medicines from China or India or locally produced. You're going to be buying Pfizer's and Moderna's and Roche and GlaxoSmithKline's. So suddenly Western capital penetrates and permeates the Iranian economy. And it's 92 plus million populations. It's enormously wealthy, right? And for the same low price that you open the gates of Troy to your capital, you also get to cut off China's Belt and Road Initiative, and you get to cut off Russia's north-south, international north-south transport corridor. And then global trade becomes, again, completely dependent on your traditional choke points, Bosporus, Gibraltar, Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, Strait of Malacca. And again, you rule the Eurasian landmass. The interesting thing about the Strait of Malacca question, so I think it was just yesterday or day before yesterday, that they said that, look, oh yeah, we're gonna charge a toll through Strait of Malacca, which is now, this is antagonizing the Chinese. It was on the 13th of this month, so 11 days ago, that the United States signed a military cooperation agreement with the government of Malaysia. Isn't that interesting? Who gave them the idea that they could charge the toll through the Strait of Malacca? I don't know, but maybe two things correlate. Maybe it's not a cost, but it's an easy way for them to begin antagonizing the Chinese government. So now it's forcing them to react, and then they can react back, and they can say like, well, we have the United States has our back. We can now leverage this relationship and get something out of it for ourselves. Well, they think they're getting something for themselves, but it's actually the Western Empire that's starting to build a next bridgehead with which to attack China economically. And then, once you start attacking economically, then you take it from there. I don't know where this is all going, Danny. I think that the Western Empire, the United States, Great Britain, European powers, NATO, they're all completely spread paper thin. They're exhausted. They cannot, let's remember, the United States has spent 20 years trying to tame the Taliban in Afghanistan. And at the end of 20 years, they had to hand Afghanistan back to the Taliban. Then they spent 10 years trying to tame Ansar Allah in Yemen. And they had to give up. They had to throw in the towel. Now they attacked Iran. They're losing against Russia and Ukraine. This is all, these are all different battlefronts of the same war. And they're losing on all fronts. I don't know where they're going with this. But, the logic of the empire is to keep attacking, to keep escalating, to keep trying to unbalance the other side, because maybe, hopefully, somehow, in some way, they might be able to take down one peg from under their rivals. But the cost on your side is also adding up. And it's coming to the point where your internal social pressures are becoming unbearable, and you're facing an economic collapse at home. So I think that the Western Empire is headed for exactly the same destination as all empires in the past. They all collapse because the cost of maintaining an empire always ends up overwhelming whatever benefits you're gaining from your colonies all around the world. And I think we're heading in that direction, and you can already see it because in the West now, the ruling establishments are having to resort to ever more obvious and ever more drastic repression and censorship, because they have to keep us all quiet because everybody's talking about this. Like none of this makes sense. We need to stop the wars. And so if it doesn't, if they don't score really significant wins in all these geopolitical grand chessboards, things are going to start to implode at home.
Yeah, very well said, Alex. Professor Jiang, I want to get some of your responses to what Alex had to say there, specifically about, the empire has effectively taken off the mask now. I mean, we're essentially in 19th century imperialism now. In the 20th and 21st century, there was like this veneer. But it seems like the public writ large is becoming red-pilled. And what I mean by that is the concept of the red pill is that, there's like this fake view of there's a fake display of the world, but underneath, underneath it is the true underworld of the world. And it seems like the true underworld of the world is coming into play. The masks are being taken off, and it looks like we're back to, again, 19th century imperialism. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah. So let me propose like a plan for Alex. Okay. I don't know if this plan is correct or not, but let's just do a thought experiment and say, what are the Americans actually up to? And the argument I want to make to you is, as Denny points out, we're going back to the 19th century, okay? So the point is not to win wars. The point is to have wars, right? You want to create balance of power throughout the different regions. So you want in East Asia, Japan and China to balance each other out. In Europe, you want Russia and Europe to balance each other out. In East Asia, you want the GCC align with Israel to balance out Iran, okay? And why you want to do this is, if the world is in constant conflict and the United States has this kind of little fortress that is invincible, and it's completely self-sufficient, it has all the resources of the Western Hemisphere, then what it can do is it can sell weapons, it can sell resources to the rest of the world and finance it as well, okay? And so let me give you a historical analogy. Think of World War II. Why did Japan attack America? Because America was embargoing Japan, right? And this was a huge issue because Japan was getting 90% of its oil from America, and America just said, sorry guys, we're not going to give you any more oil because of all these atrocities you're committing in China. Japan had absolutely no choice but to go to war. Also, America also froze all of Japan's assets. And so you could say, well, it was because Americans were disgusted by all these atrocities Japan was committing in East Asia, especially in China. But another argument is, well, it was because Japan was becoming too powerful. It could not allow Japan to colonize all of East Asia, especially China, and therefore it wanted to knock Japan down. Okay, but then you also go to Europe, where the moment that Germany invaded Soviet Union in Operation what was that stupid thing called? Barbarossa, okay, Operation Barbarossa, this massive German invasion of the Soviet Union. What did America do? America sent billions of aid to Soviet Union. Basically, America industrialized the Soviet economy. I mean, that was the extent of America's contribution to the Soviet Union. And then when the tide was turned at Stalingrad, right, it was clear that Germany was headed towards defeat. What did America do? America launched Operation Overlord. And you can argue that Overlord was not about attacking Germany. It was about containing the Soviet Union, because the real threat at that time was that if America did not come to the war, the Soviet Union would have ran through all of Europe. And once Germany was absorbed into the Soviet Union, then Russia would have been invincible. Right? That's a great fear of American policymakers going back 200 years. An alliance between Germany and Russia. The technology, science, civilization of Germany combined with the resources and manpower of Russia. All right? So America has been playing this game for a long, long time. And I think what Donald Trump is saying is, guys, World War II worked out great for us. 1950s worked out great for us, because what was 1950s? 1950s was the Marshall Plan, when we lend money to Europe and Japan in order to buy manufactured goods from us. Right? Wasn't that a great deal? That's what made America great. It created the American middle class. You could have 3 kids and all of them to college. You could have a cottage. So let's go back to that time when the world was dependent on us for resources and armaments, and we'll finance it. And by financing it, hey, here's an added bonus. We can now finance the debt, the $39 trillion debt, right? We can distribute it across the world. And so if that's a game plan, first of all, do you think that makes sense to you? And second of all, how do you think this game plan will work out, if that is the game plan moving forward?
I absolutely agree with that. I think that is a game plan, but I think that it's a game plan of one part of the American political establishment. I think that there's a lot of confusion and disagreement, because, if we go back to January of this year, and you go back to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump brought his delegation of 300 people, and the message that they delivered there to Davos, which is, basically the Death Star of the globalists, he told them globalization failed, and instead what they were proposing is the return to the American system, or national system of political economy, which is called American system because it was pioneered by Alexander Hamilton, who was the first, I think he was first Treasury Secretary under George Washington, and that's also one of the periods of American history where America suddenly became a very powerful nation. It went from a patchwork of 13 British colonies to become one of the global superpowers, right? And so this system was then described and articulated by Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, Henry Carey. And what was remarkable that in Davos in January this year, Trump's trade secretary, Jamieson Greer, gave a speech to the attendees at Davos, in which he actually explicitly mentioned Alexander Hamilton and Henry Carey and Abraham Lincoln. So, to me, this was not a random thing. A lot of thought goes into these things, and I think it reflected clearly an intention, at least of a part of the American political class, to go back to that, because the post-World War II period did work out well for the United States, but on a different system, which was the British free trade system. Once you dominate the global financial systems and your money, you're the chief creditor to the world, and your money is in demand because it's the new trade settlement currency, it's the new reserve currency, then yes, that's going to temporarily work out well in your favor. But it's going to work out in the favor primarily of the Wall Street banks, and then secondarily in favor of the military-industrial complex, because you're going to, this is new colonialism that you have to defend, which means that you need to be able to have power projection. You need to be able to bring, 700, 800, 900 military bases to all these places in the world, because you need to police the adherence to your system. In the scenario where you got Westinghouse to build its nuclear power plant for the Iranians, there's going to be a lot of people in Iran who's going to say, wait a minute, we can have it at 20% the cost if we get it for China. Well, okay, as Al Capone said, you can always get more with a nice word and a gun to someone's head than just with a nice word alone. So that gun to people's heads is the military bases and the carrier strike groups and so forth. So over this period, Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and certain other industries in the United States did really, really well. But at the same time, this eviscerated ultimately America, free trade eviscerated American industries. And so Trump administration's message at Davos is, and Trump's consistent message through his political career is, he wants to reindustrialize the United States. He wants to make the United States a manufacturing superpower and so forth. So it seemed to me at that point that faction was now dominant, and that Trump was going to be able to effect that policy turn to go back to the American system and away from the British system of free trade. And at that point, I was, that's not a random message. And it's also not a message that American voter demanded, because American public has been gaslit about left and right dichotomy which is false, whereas the free trade versus American system dichotomy is very real, but it's obscured. So nobody voted for this. The fact that Trump administration brought this message to Davos of all place, to me signified that they are for real, that they're serious. What happened on 28 February is a mystery to me, and why it happened. At any rate, I think there's a lot of truth in the idea that wars are meant to continue. They're not meant to be won, and I completely agree with this. But this is the interest of this free trade system. It's the British approach to geopolitics. Why? Because when your potential rivals in the world are fighting wars between themselves, you're selling them weapons, you're providing them credit, because as soon as you go to war, you need credit. You need to be bailed out, which is, where UAE is now, right? They had to beg the American government. They need to beg the Fed to issue them a swap line so that they have liquidity. It's not necessarily about money itself, because as Professor Jiang correctly said, UAE has a great deal of wealth that's sitting in the United States, about 1.4 trillion, right? But that means that they would have to be selling off their investments. Instead, they go, okay, we have all this wealth, but we need cash. We need, it's about cash flow, not necessarily about assets. So they say, give us a swap line. And, that way we get to continue to pay our bills. and we have the Collateral, which is our sovereign wealth fund. Where am I going with this? I forgot. But basically, the idea that wars are meant to be continuing rather than being won is absolutely true from the point of view of the Western Empire. You're keeping all your potential rivals weak. They depend on you for weapons, for technology, and for credit. And you basically fund both sides. You arm both sides, and while they're busy fighting, they're weak. They're becoming weaker, and so they can never say no to you. And once they owe you money, they're not in a position to say, well, guess what, we're going to default, or we think this is odious debt, we need to renegotiate. They just need to follow your diktat. They become dependent on you. They become your client. So this has been the foreign policy of the Western Empire forever, and it is sadly continuing in spite of, let's say, credible signals from the Trump administration that they were going to end this tragic, stupid period of history. We're still in it. Before I finish, I just want to say this. I think they're failing. And I think they're failing very, very bigly, to use, Trump's term. Let's say that in the last few years, they had 3 or 4 massively important projects. First one was the pandemic. The second one was war against Russia through Ukraine. The third one is the war in the Middle East. And they're losing all 3. So I think this is not lost on the Chinese leadership, on the Iranian leadership, and on the Russian leadership, who absolutely understand what the game is. And I think they also understand that this war doesn't end until one side capitulates completely and their system gets dismantled and reformed. And I think that we are moving in that direction.
No, I mean, that's a great point, Alex. I mean, I don't know if you guys have read the book Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by Anthony Sutton, but it pretty much lays out. Yeah, that's a great one, right? So it basically lays out how Wall Street basically funded the Bolshevik Revolution. He has another book that talks about how Wall Street funded Germany as well. So while simultaneously funding the U.S., of course. So I mean, they fund both sides throughout history. And,
right. And Anthony Sutton also said that Wall Street will eventually fund China as a new dialectic, right? So Wall Street created the Soviet Union, and eventually Wall Street will go and create China as a great competitor to the United States. So he's very wise in that regard. But let me respond to Alex's commentary. So I completely agree with Alex in that there is a war going on between the nationalists and the globalists, right? The globalists meaning, City of London, Davos, transnational capital. And the nationalists who want manufacturing to return to the United States, which is represented by Trump. And this has been going on ever since Trump's first administration. And so the question is, why did this war start? And I would argue this war started as an outgrowth, as a natural consequence of this conflict between the globalists and the nationalists. So if you're a nationalist, there are 2 major problems for you. The first is the US dollar as a global reserve currency. You hate this idea because eventually you become the guarantor of like every economic transaction in the world, and it causes excess liquidity to flow into your country, and that causes financialization. So Wall Street is dominant and manufacturing is degraded. Okay, so you hate the idea of US dollar as a global reserve currency. It also, as Alex points out, it also funds the military-industrial complex because you need a strong military in order to enforce the US dollar as a global reserve currency all around the world. And that's why you have these wars in Libya and Syria and Venezuela and all that. So I completely agree with Alex in that regard. So the first problem is the US dollar as a global reserve currency. But as Alex points out, the United States is kind of stuck right now because the only way you can finance that $39 trillion debt is if people continue to buy US dollars, okay? It's a Ponzi scheme. Okay. And then the other problem for the United States is the Federal Reserve System, which means that American government has absolutely no control over U.S. monetary policy. They have to borrow money from transnational capital, which is the Federal Reserve. So these two are a huge problem for the American government, the U.S. dollar and the Federal Reserve. And really, historically, there's only one way to resolve this conflict, and that's to destroy both the empire and the economy. Okay? You need to destroy the empire by overextending the empire to the extent where, you know what, you no longer have the forces, you no longer have the finances, you no longer have the military in order to like maintain this empire, okay? And you basically give it over to someone else. It could be China, it could be Israel, who cares, okay? But someone else takes over the world, and then you also need a global financial collapse in order to reset the economy, in order to destroy that debt, in order to destroy the power of the Federal Reserve. So that may be the plan going forward, to fight this war in Iran, knowing you'll lose, but it overextends the empire, and it causes the military to retreat back into North America. It could also trigger a civil war as well, which would and you would get the same result, and also to trigger a financial collapse around the world, so that you can reset the global monetary system. So I'd be interested in Alex's response.
Okay, so Professor Jiang, this hypothesis has crossed my mind, and let's say that it would be a very optimistic way to look at things, which let's say that if this, I think that in a way, this is going to happen anyhow. This is the direction into which this is the turn of events. And these are going to be the cascading effects of the war in Iran. The only thing that I'm confused about is, was this Trump's intention? Because I don't think it was. I would have to think that he's a lot more sophisticated than he appears. And so if this was intended, then I think there's some other power that we're faced with, and then that power, I would have to think that this power is opposed to the globalists. But which is this power? What is this? Where is it coming from? I can't.
Historical patterns, yes. Historical patterns, yes.
Yeah, but do you think that someone would have to direct events in this direction? Do you think it's a spontaneous effect?
I think it's a movement of history. You go from one extreme to the next, right? So maybe in the beginning, the nationalists were in power, then and this led to like the World War I and World War II, and then that led to too much globalization, open society, multiculturalism, all that crap, and now you're forced back into the other extreme, right? So you can argue it's just a movement of history from one extreme to the next.
Okay, fair enough. That makes sense.
So, do you think? I mean, either one of you guys could answer. I think you already answered this during our last interview, Professor Jiang. So I'll let Alex answer it. Do you think what we're seeing today, worldwide, whether it be war in Iran, war in Ukraine, things have really spiraled out of control since 2016? Really, 2016 is really the start of it, when President Trump got elected the first time. Is this really the artifact of an elite fracture? Much like Professor Jiang alluded to, the globalists and the nationalists. You look at these No Kings protests, and they're funded by like Soros, Rockefeller. You look at some of the elites that support Trump. He has his own. He has the Thiel, the Musks. So there does seem to be a fracture between elites here, and is what we've been seeing the last 10 years or so. Is that simply the artifact of an elite civil war within the United States, or in the greater Western sphere of things?
I think it may well be, Danny. I see that they are. If we let's call them elites. Even though a lot of them are Epstein class, which it's not much of an elite at all. Basically, I think that, like in any class in society, you're going to have better people and worse people in the group. And I think that, the way empires, the life cycle of an empire, you always have the rise and you have the collapse. And the collapse becomes discernible into the empire zenith, when everything looks great from the outside, but people on the inside, they understand that the structure is hollow and that it's going to implode on itself and it's unsustainable. So in history, you've always had reformers, people on the inside who say, this cannot continue, we have to reform this, we have to draw back. And you had this, in the Roman Empire, you had like a whole succession of a few dozen reformers who were part of the elite, who were patricians, aristocrats, who tried to reform the system, like the Gracchi brothers, Catiline, you had Julius Caesar, most famously. But then you have the reaction of the other people who say, no, this is working great for us. We don't want to change this system. We don't want to give up any slight bit of our privilege in order to set the empire on a more sustainable path. And so they end up eliminating all these reformers. Roman Senate, they had their death squads, and all these reformers would usually end up either ostracized or killed, along with thousands of their supporters. And so the Roman Empire was set on a declining path where basically it was the road to perdition. Like there was nothing left of the Roman Empire after like 400 AD, to the extent that money disappeared from circulation. There, like individual communities went back to barter. The industries, the manufacture of simple but necessary goods like roof tiles and nails, the iron nails, they disappeared from circulations. Pottery, dirt floors became the norm. Stone houses disappeared from our architecture, not architectural, from how do you call those people who dig the dirt to find old stuff?
Anthropology?
From anthropological footprint.
Archaeologists.
Archaeologists. Okay.
Archaeologists? Holy shit, I blanked out. Anyway, you know those people that brush dirt around stuff.
Yeah, right? Archaeologists.
Fragments of pottery.
Right.
And so, it went into a total devastation. And I think that we can see that today's Western Empire is also on a steeply declining path. And so one part of the quote-unquote elites wants to defend this. And so they are like, okay, we have to repress the population. We have to shut them into 15-minute cities. We have to destroy farming and create famine to get rid of as many of them possible. We need big wars to send all the fighting age men and to decimate the like in Ukraine, get rid of fighting age males, vaccinate everybody, and so forth. Whereas you have other people, like maybe Elon Musk, who says, okay, look, I'm selling electric cars. If you shut people into 15-minute cities, what the hell, that doesn't work. I need people to be mobile. And so they have a different vision of what the future of society should look like. And so obviously there's going to be a conflict. And then, some of the people are going to have the awareness that, like, look, if we pursue these policies, we're on a road to perdition. We need to change course. When they start changing course, there's going to be a reaction from the other side. And so, I think, Danny, you're absolutely right. You're going to get a civil war between the elites, and it's going to get ugly. And I think that we are at that point, in fact. But, how this war is unfolding, it's very difficult to say. But I think it's definitely happening behind the curtains.
All right, quick break here, because if you're buying gold or silver the normal way, you're probably overpaying by a lot. And that's because most retail dealers quietly tack on these huge markups, sometimes 10%, sometimes 20%, sometimes even 30%. And you don't even notice it. It's like paying $115 for a $100 bill. Doesn't make sense, right? So that's why I've been using the Bullion Standard Pro. It's a membership that basically lets you buy precious metals at real wholesale prices. The same prices that dealers get. So no inflated premiums, no middleman games. Their platform updates every 5 seconds, straight from mints and distributors. So what you see is literally the real market. And here's the crazy part. If you buy something like this gold American Eagle, here's the amount of money you're going to be saving at the time of this recording, at least. So it basically pays for itself multiple folds on many occasions, depending on what you buy. And if you want to try it out, they're hooking up my viewers with an exclusive 10% off their first month. Just use promo code COSM10 at checkout. That's COSM10 at checkout. So if you're stacking, investing, or just tired of getting hit with hidden markups, check them out now. Bullion Standard Pro. Click on the link down below in the description box and use promo code COSM10. Now let's get back to the video. Yeah, you can definitely see the after effects of it. You can kind of see what's been some of the artifacts of it, so to speak. Professor Jiang, I see you kind of chomping at the bits to kind of respond to what Alex here just said. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, I completely agree with Alex, and I think his reference to the Roman Civil War is extremely apt, right? So, I will highlight an instance from the Roman Civil War. So this is about a year 100 BCE, and Tiberius Gracchus, who is one of the Gracchi brothers that Alex referenced, he was a patrician, and as Alex points out, he was a reformer. And his idea of reform was very simple. This is like the height of Roman Republic, extremely wealthy, lots of land, and a lot of this land was public land. But at the same time, you had millions of people who were destitute and who were landless. So all Tiberius Gracchus said was this: we're not going to redistribute property. We're not going to steal property from the elite, from the aristocrats, who we call it optimites, but we will use public land and I'll allocate some of this public land to the most needy of our citizens. Really simple, like the least controversial idea in the world, right? Well, the senators beat him to death on the streets of Rome, and he was a tribune, which made him, like, immune from this. And the reason why they beat him to death is this public land is ours as well. The private land is obviously ours, but the public is ours as well. We are the public. We are the republic, right? So it shows you the arrogance of the elite. And we're seeing a very similar situation play out in the United States as well, where in 2016, Bernie Sanders won the Democratic nomination. He should have won the Democratic nomination, but he was railroaded by the elite. And then in 2020, he was railroaded again. And Bernie Sanders is not a radical. All right, if you just look at his platform, he is pretty moderate by, I would say, European standards. And a lot of his proposals were just really common sense. But they railroaded him and then installed Biden into office. So one thing is, yes, okay, you do have Trump. But we have to remember why we have Trump is because the American elite, the Democratic Party, is so arrogant, so removed, and so aloof that the people have no choice but to vote for someone like Donald Trump. And so even if you get rid of Donald Trump, and Alex points this out as well, if you get rid of the Gracchi brothers, well, you'll have Marius Catamine up here, then you'll have Julius Caesar up here. Okay, you're always going to have this revolution appear because the people are desperate for change. And now that Trump is on decline, we have someone like Tucker Carlson emerging to carry the MAGA banner, and like good for him. Okay, but like what's happening in America is very similar to what happened during the Roman Civil Wars.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the midterms coming up here in America in a few months, and it's looking more likely, according to the polls and the betting odds, that there will be a split government. Now, we've had a one-party government since Trump's second election win in 2024. With a split government coming into view, it seems like the risk of civil war or like the risk of some, a a lot more fireworks to happen now that the Democrats will most likely take power in the Congress and maybe even in the Senate, according to some projections out there. So Professor, because you just brought this topic, I just want to get a quick response from you, and Alex, we'll get the response from you as well, in terms of how do you think the midterms and a split government moving forward in 2027 and 2028 will impact the agenda of President Trump and the overall, temperature in America and by virtue the rest of the world as well?
So yeah, we should expect the Democrats to sweep the midterms. I think they have a very good chance of winning the House and the Senate according to the polls. My intuition tells me the midterms are not going to turn out the way that people expect. Okay, people expect the Democrats to win the midterms and then impeach Trump because that's what they did the last time, right? But I think my intuition tells me that's not what's going to happen. Okay, it's entirely possible the Democrats don't win the midterms. Something could happen where Trump basically has the National Guard and ICE patrolling the ballot boxes, and that scares off a lot of Democratic voters. Or maybe he cancels the midterms because of some national emergency, like a false flag attack. Okay, so my intuition tells me like in November things will not turn out the way that people expect. That's point one. Point two is that even if the Democrats were to come into power, you could expect a lot of blue dog Democrats to come into power, meaning these are people from the national security apparatus, people like Abigail Spanberger, who is now governor of Virginia, okay? And these people are extremely pro-war. If you're a Democrat and you're pro-war, you're pro-military industrial complex, Trump is a godsend, right? Because first of all, he makes a perfect scapegoat. You can blame everything on him, even though, as Alex points out, you really have to do this as an empire, right? You can't govern by consent; you govern by force. But like history will remember, no, it was Trump that did all of this. We Americans are innocent, we're pure, we're virgins. We didn't really want this war, but it was all Trump. Okay, so that's how history will remember this time. So Trump makes a perfect scapegoat. Also, and what's more important is that he neutralizes MAGA. And this is very important because remember, like before, MAGA was the anti-war faction. MAGA were the people who would, if Biden actually launches war, you can expect MAGA to be on the streets. You can expect an insurrection almost, but they certainly would not go and fight the stupid war in Iran. But now that Trump is in office, there are a lot of people in MAGA who see this as a holy crusade. Okay, so I think the Democrats may win, but I think that if they do win, then Trump may be more incentivized to expand this war in Iran and possibly even go after Cuba, Mexico, Colombia, Greenland, okay? Because from the perspective of empire, the military-industrial complex, transnational capital, you need these wars to happen in order to maintain global hegemony. And if Trump's going to take all the blame, then make him the scapegoat.
Yeah, Alex, what do you think? How do you think the midterms impact President Trump's agenda, and if anything will change after the midterms for how he tackles the world?
Well, I think it will be very, very difficult to predict this. This is in November. Most people will not remember this conversation by November. No matter how spectacular something is, 2 weeks later you're looking at something else. And I think there are so many wild cards in the equation that I don't even dare. I think there's a good chance that Trump is going to end up being a lame duck president. But how exactly the vote is going to turn out, the left-right dichotomy has largely been blurred in the last few years. We had a lot of Democrats defect to Trump, most notably Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, right? So I think that a lot of people no longer perceive issues as questions of left and right. So Trump's failure won't necessarily translate into an automatic win for the Democrats. Or it might be Democrats that speak a certain language, like maybe Ro Khanna is an example, that are not necessarily, you're not necessarily going back to Biden and these types of people, the Clinton mafia. Maybe it's going to favor certain types of candidates that are going to be closer to real issues and more receptive to the message of MAGA, only in a different way. But then we also can't take foreign policy out of the equation, because who knows what's going to happen between now and November. China is a factor. Russia is also a factor. I think that between them, there's an understanding and an awareness. I think most famously formulated by Sergei Karaganov, who was Vladimir Putin's advisors for a time, one of them, who said that as they perceive it, as the Russian leadership perceives it, their most important task now is to help the United States to transition from an empire to a normal power in the least disruptive way possible. And we've seen Trump blunder very badly in attacking Iran, but the reactions from China and from Russia have been quite muted. They haven't criticized him very harshly. They take their policy positions, and those policy positions are consistent, but they're not taking it out on Trump. They're not saying anything very terrible about him. So I think that there's still support, if not for him personally, there's support for what Trump represented and stood for up until his attack on Iran. And I think that this faction is alive and well in the United States. They may have been sidelined, they may have been disenfranchised in a way, but it's still there, and it's going to get support not only from MAGA but also from the most important partners that the United States has in this transition, which I think is there. Now it looks. The surface appearance of thing is the United States went right back to being the global hegemon. But I think that that's kind of paper thin. It's an appearance that's going to dissipate because it's failing. And then those forces that are still for Make America Great Again, for the nationalists, right? They're still there, and they're looking for ways to grab onto the levers of power to become relevant again. And they're going to have support in the American public, and they're going to have support from China, from Russia. Ultimately, they might be able to re-engage with the Iranians, because, Iran does want the United States to come forward as a partner, as a constructive partner. Hey, we can do stuff together, we can develop things together, but it's going to have to be on a respectful and mutually beneficial basis, rather than you telling me, capitulate and you do as I tell you. And so all these things can play out in the next few months in ways that are, I think, very difficult to see from today's perspective. But we've seen how things change very radically and very quickly these days. So between now and November, God only knows what might shape up.
Yeah. I mean, it's point well made. I mean, forget about 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. I mean, every 2 hours almost. Like there's like a new development here. Professor Jiang, you mentioned Cuba in passing here a while back. I want to get your sense on how you think, how you envision like Trump tackles Cuba, because again, we are still in a conflict or war with Iran. You did mention, I believe, on a separate podcast that this is going to be taken down to a simmer. It's going to be a slow burn as opposed to the shock and awe that we saw in the initial first month. But even so, I mean, speak about the resilience of the American military to stretch. I mean, don't they run the risk of overstretching themselves? I mean, they've used a lot of artillery the last couple of months here with the war in Iran, have they not?
Well, I mean, the reality is that the American military has not fully mobilized. Because remember, a military depends on the nation for its resources. And so what I mean by that is that the military has been trying to fight this war on the cheap using, aerial supremacy, bombs to try to decapitate the regime. Okay, that's a really cheap and easy way to fight a war. To fight a real war, you need to mobilize your nation. You need a national draft. You need like 1 million troops on the ground. Okay, that's a real war. America, for the past 2 years, have been trying to conduct regime change in Iran on the cheap, right? So starting with the 12-day war, when Israel went in and killed a lot of government officials and nuclear scientists, thinking that that would force Iran to collapse because it was a house of cards. Okay, that like they really believed that the 12-day war would have collapsed the regime. And when it's obvious that Iran was pounding Israel too hard, the Americans had to step in. Then in January there was that color revolution or failed color revolution in Iran. It was clearly a Mossad operation. A lot of the instigators, provocateurs, were paid by Mossad, and the Iranians cracked down very hard on it. And then that led, of course, to this current war. And now that the Americans recognize that the Iranians are far more resilient than we give them credit for, they're trying to dial it down and try to have a better control over the situation. So the Americans are fully committed to regime change in Iran, but they have not yet fully mobilized. They have not fully committed their resources in order to win this war. So we have to take this into account. It's not that Americans are losing. It's not like they're not even trying right now. And I think what's going to happen is that Trump will eventually get bored of this war because it's going to be a slow war. It's a war of attrition. To go in with ground troops is suicidal. So you're better off fighting a war of attrition economically. And so basically, because he's bored, he's going to stir conflicts, possibly in Greenland, possibly in Cuba, possibly in Mexico. I could easily see Trump sending in special forces to kill cartel members in Mexico for whatever reason, and that'd be very popular in the United States, right? So Trump has a lot of options, and he's a reality TV star, so he's really concerned about like how do I maintain my ratings, people are getting bored of this war, so how do I capture their attention? So that's the other point I will make. The first point I will make is that America has not fully committed to this war, but it will eventually. And my second point is that Trump is very much a ratings guy, and he's always like, how do I continue to capture people's attention? And possibly an attack on Cuba might do that.
How do you think an attack on Cuba would look like, though? I mean, would you look at would it be more boots on the ground or air oriented, or like how do you see that playing out?
It would probably be a replay of Venezuela, right? Where you've embargoed the government. People are desperate. There's blackouts every day. The Russians have sent in help, and the Cubans seem to rely more on the Russians, but that would require basically Cuba to surrender their economy to the Russians. And in the long term, that's not actually in your best interest, especially because you are in the Caribbean, in the Western Hemisphere, and you are easily within striking distance of the Americans. So it's possible you have a similar situation as you did in Venezuela, where they do a quick strike, they arrest a couple of people, and then the rest of the government surrenders. I don't know. That's possible.
I see. Alex, do you have any response to any of that? I mean, Greenland, Cuba. Do you see President Trump kind of expanding out his footprint?
Well, his administration has, I think it was Pete Hegseth or even Marco Rubio, that they held press conferences with the map of the future America in the background in red, and it includes Mexico and Colombia and Venezuela and Canada.
Technate, right?
Sorry?
I mean, it's inspired off the Technate, the North American Technate.
Yeah, exactly. So this is obviously making the rounds in the administration. Some people obviously think this is a great idea. It would solve a number of problems in the United States. If you could bring Mexico's, Venezuela's, Canada's natural resources back under your control, it would lift up the American economy and the financial system. It would add a huge amount of collateral to float up the banking system. So I think that it's definitely being considered very seriously, at least by some people. And it seems to me that these people have decisive influence at the moment in the Trump administration. At the same time, the scenario of regime change in Cuba, the way they did Venezuela, makes complete and total sense, except that the Cubans have seen it play out once. I'm not sure if you can do the same trick more than once. That they say like, aha, okay, so this is what they want to do. And then like with Iran, the Iranians prepared for this by having every key position in their state administration. They have the deputy and the deputy's deputy and the like 4 or 5 or 6 people's death, so that whenever somebody's eliminated, there's already a vetted and approved person to take over. So you can't do the same thing more than so many times. And Cubans are already obviously sitting there in the middle, under siege, paying keen attention to what's going on. It may seem easy for the United States to take over Cuba, but they tried. It didn't work. And they've embargoed and sanctioned Cuba for all these decades, and Cuba hasn't fallen. So, after Venezuela, after Iran, all these failures, one after another. Let's see what happens. I couldn't begin to guess.
Yeah, I mean, how airtight do you think that the Russia, China, Iran alliance actually is? Do you see it as being as airtight as it appears to be on the surface, or, I mean, what are its limitations? Because, I mean, this is a question for both of you guys, and like how tightly knit is the Russo-Sino-Persian alliance, so to speak? Alex, do you want to go ahead and take that one? Then I'll ask the same question to Professor Jiang afterwards.
Well, sure. I think it's pretty damn tight, because I think that they all realize that either they will hang together or they will be picked off one by one by the empire. For example, we've seen what happened in Ukraine. They regime changed Ukraine in 2014, and then over the next 7-8 years, they basically weaponized Ukraine against Russia. And I think that the Chinese understand perfectly well that if they regime change Russia, that they will weaponize Russia against China. And so for China, supporting and defending Russia is existential. And the same is true for Iran, because if the West takes over Iran, there goes Western Asia, and then there goes BRICS, and there goes Belt and Road Initiative, and then they are all much more vulnerable to. I would assume that if the West took over Iran, that Iran would become the mother of jihadist incubation, because that's what they did. When they took over Kosovo in 2000, Kosovo became host to the largest U.S. military base in that region, and it became the seminary, an incubator of jihadists that then went to Chechnya and Dagestan and Syria and all over wherever they were needed. And so they could use Iran for the same thing, because they're in the neighborhood. It wouldn't be very difficult to do. It would take many years, but it would become a risk for both China and for Russia. And so I think that this triad all perceive each other as absolutely essential support, and that they will hang together in this way until they achieve victory.
Yeah, Professor Jiang, what do you think? Same question.
Alex, have you guys had a chance to visit China yet? Have you been to China yet?
Unfortunately, I haven't. I sent
Yeah.
my son last year, but I haven't been myself.
Okay. So I've been here for the past 25 years, 30 years, and it pains me to say this, but the alliance is not as strong as you imagine it to be. Because ultimately, I think that what drives their foreign policy is their worldview, how their cultural worldview, how they understand themselves and how they understand their place in the world. And unfortunately, if you look at China's 5,000 years of history, they don't think strategically here. They do not think geopolitically here in China. Chinese are first and foremost concerned with themselves, and that's about it. So China, 中国 means the Middle Kingdom. And so the understanding is that China is a center of the world. China's not interested in the world. If you come and like pay tribute to the emperor, that's fantastic. We don't have to. We don't really care. Remember, China is the only nation in the world to build the Great Wall to keep people out, right? And it's a very large, complex, and didn't really work. But it shows you the mentality of people here. So Chinese policymakers just don't think in terms of like grand alliances and geopolitical strategy. They just think in terms of pure economics. So you're absolutely right in that. Look, if you just read what the Americans say, okay, if you just look at their policy papers, including the National Security Strategy, Elbridge Colby wrote a paper called Strategic Sequencing, which is saying like we can't deal with all three at once, right? So let's deal with Iran, then China, then Russia, okay? Strategic sequencing, right? And you would think that the Chinese would be like, oh my God, they're going to come after us eventually. But the reality is they don't care. It's unbelievable, okay? Like it's clear that the Americans are embargoing China. It's possible the Americans take over the Strait of Malacca. It's possible they remilitarize Japan. It's possible that Taiwan becomes, a fortress, an aircraft of fortress, and like the Chinese don't care. All right. So I'm reading the Chinese news, and what they care about is money, and like they're like, oh, we invested billions of dollars into Iran, but we invested more into the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. So let's get the Iranians to stop fighting this war. All right. We don't care who started this war. We don't care. We don't care why this war started. All we care about this stupid war stops so that we can continue to make money. We can continue to get oil from the GCC. We can continue to get oil from Iran. And we have to protect our investments in infrastructure in the GCC as well as Iran. This is how they think. It is insane what's going on here. All right. And I've been here for 30 years. And like every day I see this crap and I'm like, they must change at some point. Okay, they must give up their short-term economic scheming and approach a more holistic geopolitical approach in order to become a superpower, and they've never done it. All right, so I mean, I'll just leave it there. So when you have a chance to visit China and meet with Chinese people, then you have a better sense that Chinese are just wired differently from other people.
Okay, so fair enough. But what about because I gave it a little bit of thought because it wasn't clear to me up until a few years ago what game China was playing, what the Chinese leadership, right? What the hell was going on? Are they, and the sense that I made from it, and I could be mistaken, but it seems to me that China does have a strategic agenda, and I think the easiest way to verify this is the whole Belt and Road Initiative, right? And China came on the scene basically in the modern times after 1971, when Richard Nixon ended the dollar's convertibility to gold. And I think that this is when they knew that they were going to sacrifice the United States as the host to the empire, and that they will need a new host and a new global enforcer. And so almost immediately, Henry Kissinger and Nixon went to China to open China, right? And the Chinese just basically let them in. But I think that they didn't let them in because they agreed to take on the role of being the new carrier of globalization in the world, but in order to decapitate this beast. And the reason why I believe that is because I often hear from Xi Jinping talk about the century of humiliation. And that was really, really horrendous. What was done. So China was at the time the world's foremost global economic superpower, a 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 year old civilization, right? And then in the space of a century, it was reduced to the world's poorest country. And I have to believe that to turn that around, there had to have been strategic thought, that they said, okay, so these people want to come in, we'll let them in. We become member of the World Trade Organization. They want to send all their industries to us because we are a source of large pool of cheap labor. Let them. I looked at the technological and scientific competitiveness of China. There's some Australian institute that I forget the name of it, but they measure countries' competitiveness in, I think, 64 different technologies, right? And now suddenly China is the world leader in all but 7 of them. And 20 years ago, the United States was the leader in almost all of them. So this leap, how did it happen? There had to have been some strategic thought given to this process. And so therefore I believe that there had to be some strategic thought given to the process of to the thought of how do we not get a century of humiliation again? Because if this parasite can completely destroy a civilization in the space of 100 years, and they've done the same to Germany, then we have to be we have to be on our guard, and we have to learn how to destroy this parasite. So anyway, that's my perception. I've never been to China, but reading about China and reading papers and articles that come out from China, my impression is that there is very deep, very sophisticated strategic thinking to the whole game. And I think that there's a duality that they, in order for China to be able to do that, they had to genuinely let the West in. And I remember that up until 2012, I remember many Westerners like George Soros and Kissinger were saying China is the model for the future. China is going to own and carry out the process of globalization. The whole West is going to become, reform along Chinese model and blah blah blah. And I think that Xi Jinping's election was the inflection point. All of a sudden, they all go cold, and they are like, no, China is terrible, human rights, this and that. And then I think that all these Western financial interests realize that they've been taken in, that the Chinese leadership has no intention of becoming their new global cop. I remember the Rothschilds had an office in Beijing, and they were giving interviews to CNBC and Bloomberg television from their Beijing office. And then suddenly they were like all out.
Right. So let me provide some historical context so you better understand the situation in China. You're absolutely right in that China's progress these past few decades has been stellar. And the level of modernity in this country is off the charts. The progress has been amazing. And so what happened was that during China's century of humiliation, there was a deep reflection within Chinese culture as to why this was happening. And this, created an intense patriotism, an intense intellectualism as to how to avoid this in the future. And from this generation emerged some of the greatest leaders in Chinese history, including Mao Zedong, including Deng Xiaoping. And they came into office in 1949, making sure that this would never happen to China again. And these are very strategic thinkers, especially Deng Xiaoping. And they were humble people because they came from humble backgrounds, and they fought very long term. And this generation created the foundations for China's economic rise. Deng Xiaoping reached out to the Americans, Jimmy Carter. Mao Zedong welcomed Richard Nixon to Beijing. In the 1980s, start this massive cooperation between America and China. Now, people appreciate that America offshored its manufacturing to China. That's always been talked about. But what's not talked about, but which is really important to understand this relationship, is that China offshored its elite selection and indoctrination to America, right? So the best and brightest students, those who came from the most powerful families, they all went to America to study. And that's going to have a huge impact on the character of your elite. During the century of humiliation, there's a deep sense that we have to constantly reflect on the failings of our culture. And like everyone knew the failings of Chinese culture. It was insular, too conservative, too corrupt, too much infighting, too much selfish, short-term behavior, okay? So back then, there was a deep desire to change the Chinese character. You come to China today, and after a few decades of economic reform, you have this tremendous arrogance and hubris in the people that never really existed during the century of humiliation. People in China literally think they're the best in the world. And these skyscrapers, these high-speed railways, these airports demonstrate the superiority of Chinese culture and Chinese. So we have nothing to learn from the world, right? And then like a guy like me, look, a guy like me, I'm considered an idiot in China because I talk too much and I have too many opinions. I criticize too much, right? I'm only popular in the West because the Westerners are stupid. And they like it when a Chinese person, bashes his own culture, even though I really don't talk that much about China. All right. So, I mean, yes, you're absolutely right in that China's century of humiliation was devastating. You're absolutely right in that China's progress has been amazing. But eventually you reach a point where the second generation or the third generation, they're full of themselves. They're too arrogant. They have hubris. And they are incapable of self-reflection and recognizing the limitations of China. So it's very hard for China to improve. And another point I will make is that it's one thing to hear what China says, but just look at what Chinese are doing with their feet, right? They're voting with their feet, which is to say the wealthiest people in China are moving to the United States, they're moving to Japan, they're moving to Singapore. So if China is really the future of the world, why are the most powerful people in the world, the most powerful people in China with all the money, why are they getting the hell out of here? Yeah. But do you have any questions or?
No, I think that's very fascinating. But since you are in China and you're confronted with the Chinese people, that's what's going to affect you the most. But everything you said, you could be describing the American people, or you could be describing Croatian people. I'm Croatian. You find this arrogance and conceit everywhere. So yeah, that's fair enough. But when you mention Mao Zedong, I have to go back. I'll read a quote from Mao Zedong from more than 50 years ago, which I found infinitely fascinating because it's very prescient, and it also underscores that these people are extraordinarily sophisticated thinkers looking very, very far ahead. And I wrote ages ago, I wrote an article about this, but I'll read his quote exactly, and I checked it to make sure that it's genuine, that it's not a hoax. Okay, quote. So this was in 1971 that he said this. Quote, "In another 50 years, China will be very strong. America will most likely be very envious and restless, but it doesn't dare to attack China. It will research germ contamination instead. After it finishes with this unconscionable deed, it will self-destruct." Okay? Isn't that interesting? COVID, hello.
Well,
Anyway.
sorry, but I'm saying like in China, what the government tells the people is that COVID was an American bioweapon that was leaked in China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It was.
Yeah, I know. Thank you. Yeah.
The sky's blue.
Yeah, bears crap in woods.
But I mean, like, think about this, okay? So the government in China says COVID was a bioweapon that was American manufactured. Why was it in China being researched, right? Why?
Yes.
How did it get into the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is a military lab? And so, I mean, it shows you that basically the elite, the Chinese elite and the American elite are much more close than you imagine.
Well, yeah, I absolutely, but they would have to be, they would have to be, because if you want to know what your enemy is up to, you have two choices. Either you let them in or infiltrate their system deeply, or you create an autarky like North Korea, where you like build a wall and say like, we don't want you here, stay away. Japan tried that in the Middle Ages and it didn't work. Eventually they got penetrated. They allowed the Dutch to set up an island where they could do their trading, and then little by little they took over. So I think that and I think with time inevitably North Korea's autarky would fall as well. So I think that the only way you can do this, you have to, like in martial arts. I used to practice Aikido for many years, and basically the easiest way to subdue your opponent is, in a moment of time, you have to become one with them, and then when his mass and your mass are one, they come practically together. Then with very little effort, you can overthrow them, you can manipulate them. So I guess in a strategic way, that's a choice to make. You say, we have to let them in.
So let's just do a thought experiment. Let's just say that Trump visits China in mid-May, and the meeting goes really well. And then after a series of negotiations, apparently it's supposed to be like 4 meetings this year. So Trump has a state visit in mid-May. China will reciprocate later on. And then they'll also meet at APEC as well as G20. Okay, so there's supposed to be 4 meetings. But let's just say like the outcome of these 4 meetings is that China signs a deal with America. And in this deal, China will buy American LNG. How would you perceive such a deal? And this is just a thought experiment. We're just speculating.
I'm sorry, when you say China would buy American what? LNG?
LNG, like American
LNG.
Yeah. Because Qatar can't supply LNG now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be terribly surprised. I mean, that's almost a normal thing. Look, I was in the early 1990s. I was in Croatian military. We were at war against the Serbian military. We traded with them nonstop. They bought diesel from us and we sold it to them. There's even one of my best friends from childhood. His unit was near Bosnia, and Serbian troops from Bosnia were running low on artillery ammunition. So they called up the Croatian side and they said, we need to buy some artillery shells. And then the Croatians said, like, what, are you crazy? We sell it to you and then you shoot at us. And they said, no, promise, we won't shoot at you. We're going to shoot at the Muslims with them. Promise? Yes, promise. All right. So we sold them the artillery munitions. And they held their word. They shot at the Muslims. They didn't shoot at us. But this shit happens. It's not black and white. It's like all, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. It wouldn't be even particularly extraordinary.
Right. Let me paint you another scenario then. Okay. Let's just say America now controls Venezuela, and they want to develop Venezuela's energy infrastructure. But ExxonMobil and Chevron refused to make the billions of dollars of investment necessary in order to develop the infrastructure, okay? So they subcontracted to China, right? So the Chinese come in and they develop that infrastructure in order to sell oil back to China. How would you perceive that deal?
It would be problematic, but I think it would inevitably be negotiated. Somebody would have to make a complaint. Somebody would have to acknowledge the complaint. If you wanted to antagonize China and escalate to a conflict, then you would say, you would give them the middle finger. If you wanted to resolve the conflict, then you would say like, well, okay, we can meet you halfway. Here's what we need from you. How about some rare earth minerals? And then maybe China would say like, well, all right. So, horse trading, basically, that's what I would expect.
But if there's so much horse trading going on, then how tight is the alliance between China, Iran, and Russia?
I see your point. I would say that it's still going to be very tight at the top level strategic, at the strategic level. Because the conflict is not between China and the United States, or Russia and the United States, or Iran and the conflict is between two systems of governance. We have on record a number of very high-level Western leaders, officials, say as much explicitly. One was George Soros at Davos in 2021. Klaus Schwab said the same thing. Another person that I heard in person say this was former U.S. ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. No nation is a monolith, so you can trade with the United States and you can establish good relationships with people and organizations that might be friendly to you, that might be receptive to your message, that might be supportive of you. There's other instances in society that are your clear enemies. But I think that the system that is opposed to China, to Russia, to Iran, and to any nation that wants to be sovereign, that wants to be independent, and that wants to chart their society's development independently, their enemy is this system that I think is rooted in the City of London and Wall Street. And so, because this system is so effective at mobilizing forces in the West, as they mobilized Napoleon, as they mobilized Hitler, as they mobilized the Bolsheviks, the whole British Empire, I think that to take that system down, you have to hold a tight alliance, but you also have to cooperate with the people in the host countries. Do you know what I mean? So
I completely agree. I think that's great analysis. Yeah, no, that didn't occur to me, but like once you said it, it makes perfect sense. Where, it's still a civil war between the nationalists and the globalists, and this is being played out in all nations. And so the globalists are on top, and for the nationalists to triumph, they have to work across nations. So it's almost like a realignment of elites, right? No, I think that's a great point. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, correct. Like going back to Tiberius Gracchus,
Right.
if you wanted to take down the Roman system, you would want to make an ally of him rather than, like if you confront everybody, then you're pushing him into the camp of the people he's opposed to anyway.
But doesn't that mean that this war that's happening, I mean, in Iran, it's just going to get larger and larger because ultimately, in the background, it's a war for the future of the world, and so this cannot ever stop. I mean, it's just going to escalate and escalate until it engulfs the entire world.
Unfortunately, yes, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that it's a conflict that's gonna continue until the collapse of the Western Empire or their victory. But they're on a decline, and I think that the rising powers like China, Russia, and Iran understand very well what they're up against and who they're up against. They know that they're not up against the British people, the American people, the French people. They know that they're up against a ruling establishment that has its weaknesses, and that at the same time they might have allies in the very countries that are opposed to them. So yeah, you're right. The conflict is probably going to expand. Well, I talk sometimes with a Croatian military expert. His name is Admiral Davor Domazet, who is very, very well connected, both in the West and in Russia, and who has characterized the current conflict as a total global war, because he says it's not just Ukraine, it's not just Middle East, it's not just Taiwan and so forth. It's practically everywhere, and also it's inward. Because, this attack on farmers, the LGBT nonsense, the vaccines, digital IDs, CBDCs, 15-minute city, all of this is the same war turned inward at the same time as it's turned outward. And so I think that it's in everybody's interest to take this system down, including the French people, American people, and so forth. And so you wouldn't want to overtly be an enemy to a whole nation and then force the population to close ranks with their Epstein class leaders. You would want to be very discerning to slowly, like that game when you have like a tower of little sticks and you have to pull them out.
Jenga.
Strategically pull out the little sticks until the whole thing implodes, rather than having that thing, glue itself together, and then you have to fight like a 19th century war against the whole nation.
So then my question for you then is, what is the globalist reaction to what's happening? If you're the city of London, if you're Wall Street, how do you maintain power? What do you do in this scenario?
Well, I think it's obvious what they're already doing. They're allocating 900 billion or 1.6 trillion euros to the military-industrial complex in Europe. They're preparing to mobilize men and draft them into the military service. They're planning a big war against Russia for 2029 or 2030. They're already doing it. They're clamping down on free speech. They're doing all kinds of everything to kind of corral the populations and to manipulate them to their ends, which is war against Russia, which is going to eliminate military-age men from society, as they've done in Ukraine. It's going to leave a lot of vulnerable people behind, women, children, elderly. They're going to bring how do you call immigrants to replace the men, as they're planning for Ukraine and as they've done in many countries to a large extent already, France, Belgium, Ukraine, United Kingdom. And because what is their game primarily, other than taking down Russia and Iran and China and so forth? Their game is to stay in power. And so they're as afraid of Russia as they are of their own populations. So they want to stay in power. They want to bring all these brown people to defend them, to man the police forces and military units and so forth, and to keep their fraudulent monetary system as the only game in town, to prevent us from transacting in any other way. So if you want to have money, well, you have to take loans from their banks.
But I mean, wouldn't that scenario create the conditions for a civil war in all countries where, these people are being drafted or sent to die off in the trenches of Ukraine? I mean, like, they're not going to go and die like that, right? They'd rather fight for their families.
The Ukrainians didn't want to die. They didn't want to fight. I mean, there were polls in Ukraine run just before the war against Russia started, 2 or 3 weeks before the war started. And the question in the poll was, if Russia invaded, would you pick up arms to defend Ukraine against Russia? And I think that nationwide, the percentage of men who said yes was on average less than 20%, less than 1 in 5. And in some parts of Ukraine, it was extremely low, like it was in the single digits, I think. So Ukrainian men didn't want to go to war against Russia. And the fact that they managed to sacrifice well over 1 million of them tells you that their ability to engineer society, to corral the population towards their end is in fact very, very effective. So we have to be very careful about that. I have a 14-year-old and 15-year-old. So by 2029 and 2030, there will be perfect military-age men. So I don't want for them to have the future as Ukrainian men, but this is what they're preparing for us. And so they're hoping to save themselves, but as I said, they have been failing very, very badly. In ways that wasn't the case before. When they needed a war against Germany, they orchestrated the war against Germany, and it happened. When they needed the next war between Germany and the Soviet Union, they orchestrated it, and it happened. Now they orchestrated a war against Russia, and the idea was to destroy Russia. Well, that failed. And they're failing against Iran. And their master plan for the new normal, in which, we were going to go around with, little QR codes, and, we would have to get a permit to board a plane, to go on a train, to get in a restaurant or a theater and all this. That failed. That just kind of disintegrated. So I think that the internet and the social media completely changed the social equation. They can no longer control the narrative, and without controlling the narrative, they cannot mobilize the masses. So all they're left with now is doing it by force, and that doesn't work either. There's a hell of a lot more of us than there is of them, and people are saying no. So what are you going to do? Are you going to put everybody in prison? Well, that's what the 15-minute cities are, but even that agenda is going very slowly and with a lot of difficulties. And then all it takes is for people, like when they put up those posts, those monitoring posts that in Britain, people are just simply sawing them off. They're taking them down. It's easy. What are you going to do then? Police every post? You're going to put a camera to observe a camera, and then a camera to watch the other camera? It's like, it's never ending. So it's like, I think it's like King Canute flogging the waves to stem the tide. It's going to fail, but it's going to be probably a few years which are going to be very difficult in the West.
So what do you see happening after Project Ukraine fails? Like the war is lost, and you've lost like 10% of your military age man, so you can't actually sustain this war anymore. What comes next?
They have tried, and they will continue to try to open the second front. They tried Georgia, that failed. They tried the Balkans, that failed temporarily, you know. And the third flashpoint, I think, would be the Baltic states. They practically had the Bosnia and Herzegovina rigged for an eruption of conflict last year. It failed since Trump came to power, because the Trump administration actually, and I know this as a fact because I spoke with people who were directly involved in this, Trump's people completely kicked out the Brits. They told them, okay, you're out, we're in charge. And they de-escalated the conflict. So a war that was supposed to erupt didn't erupt. And the reason why this was important, because, you know, Bosnia is where World War I erupted, you know, with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
And that was staged. By the way, it was staged. That assassination was staged. I'm not sure if you know that history.
No, I know that history. I didn't know it was staged, but at any rate, it was not the cause of war. It was
Catalyst.
It was a pretext to start escalating the conflict between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. So it was used for that. And it was, you know, it was manipulated by the British and the Russian ambassador in Belgrade.
So you would like the story of how he died, okay? So when I studied World War I history, what I learned was that you know, the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated by this you know, Serbian nationalists, right?
Yeah.
And you know, his car got blown up. Well, if you actually look at the real history, what happened was this. The car was driving, a bomb was thrown by these black hat terrorists, but he actually survived that. In fact, he didn't actually get hurt at all, okay? So then what happened was that he was like, oh my God, a lot of people died because of this terrorist attack. So he goes and visits them in the hospital, okay? And then he's at the hospital, and then for the reason, his chauffeur drives him to a, I believe it was a cafe. And like miraculously, sitting in the cafe was a black assassin, and that's how they got him. The chauffeur drove him directly to the assassin, who then took a bullet, who took a gun and shot him to death.
Yes. I'm aware of that, but the story, the version that I kind of accepted is that the chauffeur took a wrong turn by accident, but you may be right. It may be the chauffeur was in on it.
How miraculous is that, man? You take a wrong turn and you...
You're right, actually.
Oh, wow.
That makes sense. Yeah. But anyway, you know, that's where the whole process started building up irreversibly. And so this is what might have happened in Sarajevo now, because they were already building up a conflict between the Serbian entity and the federation in Bosnia. You know, it's complicated. I don't want to go into all these explanations, but basically what the idea was, if that conflict started to happen, the Serbian entity would then be supported by Serbia proper. Croatians would be drawn in because there's a Croatian minority that forms some of the cantons in the federation. If Croatia was drawn in, Croatia is a NATO member, so I'm sure that they would be able to finagle Article 5 and bring the whole of NATO. If they bring the whole of NATO, then Russia couldn't stand aside and let Serbia fight on its own, right? So there you have suddenly World War III on European continent, Russia against NATO. Boom, like this. The British were doing this. They even wrote papers like their think tank RUSI, Royal United Services Institute, wrote a paper where they said that the Balkans would inevitably become the second front in West's war against Russia. Well, that failed too, since Trump came into office. It doesn't mean that they will give up. They will not give up. But at least for the time being, that has been unrigged. It has been de-escalated for the time being. Now they're trying to get the Baltics they're trying to get something going in the Baltics. But I mean, it doesn't matter. They're going to lose anyway. Barbarossa was the biggest invasion force ever assembled. It was 3.5 million troops. Within a year, that number grew to 6 million troops fighting inside Russia against the Soviet Union. Today, we cannot even dream about 600,000 troops, let alone 6 million. We're like 4 light years away from that. So they're going to lose anyway. But, Professor Jiang, as you said, the idea is to keep the wars going, not to win them. They don't care that they were going to lose. They need to keep these wars going. But they're going to lose.
What is the exit strategy for the elites then? Because I'm sure they have exit strategies.
I'm not sure that they do. It seems to me that for them, this is existential. It's all or nothing. If they lose, they're done because they don't know how to do anything else. They're a parasite draining the lifeblood of the rest of the society.
Is that why they're building bunkers?
Well, they're building bunkers to preserve themselves, to disappear when people come out with the pitchforks. But, you can't stay in the bunker forever.
Yeah.
You're going to have to come out.
And you'll go crazy in those bunkers, by the way.
Probably, yes, you would. But I think, in a way, that would be, they're already crazy. They're already crazy. I've read stuff. I've researched stuff. And some of the stuff that they've done really, really shows that they're crazy and they're also really stupid. The agendas that they pursue, somebody should walk in there and say, like, guys, are you out of your head? This is never going to work. No, they pursue it all the same, and then it doesn't work. And then they go to do the next thing. You know why? Because they have infinite resources. For them, this is just like playing games. Oh, that didn't work. Well, let's try this one. And let's try again. They've been trying to destroy Russia for a few centuries, and they lose every time. And then they go and try again.
Well, this has been a awesome discussion. I really enjoyed it, guys. I know we're running a little over time, but do you have room for one more question, guys?
Sure.
So, Alex, we've been discussing the economic incentives of everything that's been going on, and you're probably one of the most, if not the most qualified person to talk about that kind of stuff. But also, there's also like the spiritual, religious, the eschatological incentive structure as well that Professor Jiang has talked about in the past as well. So we've talked about the economic incentives, the spiritual, eschatological incentives for this war in Iran. Is this really what's driving things around the world in your view, Jiang, more so than the economic side of things, or is it a mixture of both? That's Jiang.
Yeah, so this is the way I understand things. The eschatology is important because the elite, as Alex points out, they're not very smart. They don't know anything, right? So they believe in this crap. They believe in astrology. They believe in reincarnation. And what the eschatology does is it gives them like a script, an action plan to work from, to guide their actions, right? The other thing about eschatology that people don't appreciate is that eschatology is actually hidden history, right? Because religion, it just basically takes tens of thousands of years of human history and it distills them into parables or myths, that capture the flow of human history. And so there is truth into a lot. There's truth in eschatology, and that's why the elite, believe in this eschatology. So it's not that these elite are the ones driving history. It's more that eschatology gives us a framework to understand how history moves. The elite understands this, and so they position themselves in a way that allows them to maximize their benefit during times of historical tumult. And so that's the way I understand eschatology. Also, eschatology is the operating system for secret societies, right? So you join a secret society in order to enact a certain eschatology. So that's the way I understand how this works.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like it's been ramping up a lot lately with the eschatology, because you've got all these different eschatologies kind of playing out and competing with each other as well.
Right, but again, it's because we are in a period of imperial decline, and when in a time of imperial decline, history really ramps up, right? Actions happen really fast because an empire becomes anxious and desperate, and so they behave in a way that's not rational. They behave in a way that's just pushes things forward in a way that wouldn't happen naturally.
Understood. Well, guys, I'm not going to take too much more of your time. You've been very gracious with it so far. Anything else either of you would like to talk about before we wrap up and take this thing home? Alex?
No, nothing special. I would just say that this is a very, very important time in humanity's history, and I think that we, the people, are winning. But I think that things may look discouraging to many people. And I always like to go back to that Confucian saying, like when a large tree falls, it falls with great noise and destruction. But seeds grow in silence. So what this means to me is that we're watching old, obsolete structures of society implode. And so this kind of attracts our attention. It practically hypnotizes us. But we have to keep in mind that the invisible part is those seeds growing. And seeds in nature always grow into something beautiful. So we must always keep in mind that we are in that process. And even if we get mesmerized by horrible things that surround us, we should not be defeatist. We should keep in mind that we must carry on, put one foot in front of the other. And I think that we are in a unique position in many, many generations of humanities to actually take the world in a better direction and leave a better future for our children. So it's not a time to be discouraged. It's time to keep on keeping on.
Professor Jiang.
No, I completely agree with Alex's sentiment, and I think that's very poetic. And one thing I will add is that we all have our own individual responsibility to contribute to this time. Be vigilant, because as Alex points out, the elite, they're kind of stupid, but they're also very evil and desperate. So they have actually quite a few tricks up their sleeves. So I'm not sure if you've been following the news of the scientists who've gone missing or dead, and it seems related to disclosure. So it's possible they fake an alien invasion over the next few years as they become much more desperate. And that's exactly like COVID, where, you know what, if you go along with it, they win. But if you just open your eyes and just think for yourself, they're not going to win. So we have to be vigilant, and we have to appreciate our own individual responsibility to making a better world.
Excellent. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find each of you guys? Alex.
Well, I'm active on X. My handle is @NakedHedgie. I have 2 publications on Substack. One is iSystem Trend Compass. The other one is my personal Substack called Alex Krainer Substack. And I also have a YouTube channel that I started uploading stuff on this year. It's called Alex Krainer, I think, pretty much. That's it.
All right. We'll have that link down below. Professor Jiang?
Yeah, so I'm on two sites. I'm on YouTube, Predictive History, the channel, and also I'm on Substack, predictivehistory.substack.com.
Excellent. We'll have the link to everything down below in the description box as well as the pinned comment. And be sure to like the video, guys. Let's get this pushed out into the algorithm to as many people as possible. This is a crucial discussion and conversation that the entire world needs to hear, quite frankly. So hit the like button, comment, go Alex, go in the comment section, go Jiang, go in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? And why? You got to let me know why you agreed or why you disagreed. Are you as optimistic as as Alex and Professor Jiang put it towards the end, or are you not? So let me know your thoughts down below. Subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Hit the bell notification. Catch me on Substack, capitalcosmos.substack.com, and I will catch you all next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.